Hello, and welcome to a new edition of At the Wheel with me, Joe White, sitting outside on what may be one of the last nice days of the year here in Detroit. I write the High Speed Rodeo newsletter, and with me is Tu Lee of Sino Auto Insights. And as always, we will be diving in to the latest news and trends in the world of cars. This week, we're going to talk about GM's Tech Day. We're going to talk about the conference that we're both going to be at in Detroit, the Reuters Automotive Conference, and we're going to look at what the latest is in the news. We have a lot to say, but as always, none of it should be taken as investment advice. Tu, how you doing? And what's on your mind as we head into Halloween? Who needs Halloween scaries when you've got the auto industry to worry about?
It is absolutely crazy. So, a couple of things, Joe. I'm looking forward to sharing the stage with you tomorrow afternoon at the Reuters conference. We're gonna probably poke some bears and hopefully get some good responses and some good interaction. Number two, my son in eighth grade just got back from his DC trip, and
Oh, wow, fun.
luckily, only one of the museums was open, so he did get to go to the Spy Museum. I think most of the other museums are either closed or semi-closed because of the shutdown. So and the last thing I will let you know is that the Chinese automotive body came out with their projections through 2040. So for the next 15
Oh,
years,
right.
really, really aggressive. I think you've seen some of those numbers, so we can talk about that a little bit. But I
What? You know
don't
what?
want. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we talk about that? Because I think that is going to give some context to some of the other things that we thought of before. Looking at like I said, looking at GM's Tech Day and looking at Tesla, kind of what's the latest is from Tesla. But
Let
that
me let me
that
set the table
document
then.
from yeah,
Let me
to
set
do
the
that
table.
because that document sets the table. Go ahead.
So they've come up with these plans every 5 years. And we've seen from the West, I think, over the last several years, that everybody was kind of surprised. And so they had one 10 years ago and they had one 5 years ago. They launched one last week. And it tells you percentages, it tells you goals, it tells you, you know, what they plan to do with regards to qualitative factors. And so
Right.
I don't want anyone in the West to be, oh, I'm so surprised that they hit this 80% take rate in 15 years,
Hmm.
because guess
Hmm.
what? That was what they were targeting. But to set the table, the China market is the largest passenger vehicle market in the world. It's around 25 to 27 million units. By 2040, it should be over 30 million units. And it's been the number one market since 2009. It's almost double the US market, and it is more than double the European Union if you exclude the UK. So when you think about the numbers and the percentages that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of seconds here, think about 25 million, 27 million, 2x the EU, almost 2x the US market. And so, what were the numbers that jumped off the screen when you were looking at them, Joe?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I think the 80%, I mean, the 80% take rate for electrified or electric vehicles, which honestly is, I mean, it looks like a stretch, except that they're starting today, like this year, it's over half. So, I mean, definitely it's going to be, it's ambitious in the sense of, they're going to move to the interior, right? I mean, electrifying big city driving is one thing. Electrifying driving in the more rural, less affluent interior of China is probably another. But when you're starting from a base of over half, um, and you've got the government, the central government, and presumably the provincial governments acting toward this goal, um, it really does seem like China is just gonna be more or less done with combustion technology, except for probably specialty uses of one kind or another, and that
And
that it's all going to
exports.
be, yeah, well, exports, right, because they got all that capacity, and we can talk about that. But yeah, exports to markets where electrification will come much more slowly, again because of money and infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like they're going to close the deal on this. This is going to be the largest market is going to be an electric market, And then I'm going to throw back to you, electric market dominated by whom? Not by the Western automakers, I assume, right? It's going to be dominated by who?
So there
The
was an analyst,
BYD.
a professor at one of the universities in southern China, and I think Xpeng also, Brian Gu or He Xiaopeng echoed these sentiments. The minimum ante at the China market, China table, is 2 million units. And so folks that can't sell 2 million units over the long run or year, they're not likely going to be a factor in the China market. Now, when we think about 2 million units, it doesn't seem like that much when you look at a GM, a Ford, a Volkswagen Group, but Tesla is not there yet.
No.
And BYD is over 2 million units, but only 3 or 4 years ago. So it's very recent for them, but their trajectory is this way. Tesla's is kind of this way. We'll talk about Tesla a little bit later, but this is where we have to look at the newer players who are continuing to grow, whereas some of the legacies are kind of shifting chairs on the deck of the Titanic, perhaps.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, yeah, and again, I mean, this has global impact. It's not. I mean, it's not like, well, Porsche is getting run out of the Chinese market, but no worries. No, Porsche. I'm just picking on Porsche because they had a leadership change within the last week or so, and Porsche was once very successful in China, and a significant share of their global profit came from China. And this is not the case anymore. And you got the CEO of the Volkswagen Group, which still kind of sort of controls Porsche to a degree, even though it's a separate share listing. But CEO of the Oliver Bloom, before he exited as CEO of Porsche, basically said our business model is doesn't work anymore. That's a big statement from a brand as powerful as that. And again, GM still hanging in there, but hanging in there at fractions of the profit and sales volumes that they were used to not even a decade ago, more recently than a decade ago. Yeah, so it's profound.
well, the big two, the Detroit two in China are effectively exporters
Yeah,
from the China market.
yeah. And Ford for sure. I mean, they've said that out loud that that's what they're planning to be is an exporter.
Now, were you mentioning Porsche because of this crest on
Well,
my?
it may have yeah, it may have had something to do with it, but also just because I mean, it's so striking. I mean, look, I mean, and again, I mean, this is obviously a bit dated, but I think of Porsche as a brand, just a globally successful, super profitable, super powerful brand, um, aspirational across cultures and across time zones, but not anymore.
I think
At least
you're
not to that
you know
degree.
what, you're such a gentleman. I'm going to put it more bluntly. Car guys, me and you, we would love to have a 911 in our garage. Generally speaking, most car guys would
Sure.
love to have a 911. So when you think of car brands that are as bulletproof as they can be around the world, you think of Porsche.
Yeah, that's my
And
point. I agree.
so Porsche at its all-time high was almost 400,000 units, with 90,000 heading to China just 3 or 4 years ago. They're
Hmm.
lucky if they ship 40,000 units this year. So
Yeah.
that's how much the market has cratered for Porsche in China. And it goes to show that the so-called heritage bulletproof brands that we think of as old school car guys, they might not have a future unless they can also redefine who they are, reposition, and then add features, whether it's analog or digital features that people want. The challenge with Porsche in China specifically is that one of every two Porsches ships to a woman or is purchased by a woman, and none of their
Hmm.
marketing material reflects that. So
Really interesting.
um,
Yeah, it seems like
it
a miss.
is, and they price their electric vehicles, the Cayenne, the Macan, pretty high, and
Hmm.
that's not a winning formula in China currently. So a little bit more to kind of emphasize how much Porsche has fallen in China. They entered the market in 2001, and up until 2023, 2023 or 2021 or 2022, they hadn't had a down quarter. So for 22 years, all they did was
Hmm.
this. And
Yeah.
now to see that it went from 90,000 units to 40 in just a couple of years is pretty astonishing.
Well, so before we move on to speak of another brand that may be sort of having to reposition is Tesla, but let me ask you some more about this planning document that the Chinese government has put out. I mean, what are some of the other things that you see there? Because it's a broad document and I mean there's a mention, for instance, of OLS, which is flying cars essentially. I mean, yeah, what else did you see there that seems important? Because look, if you look over the last 5 years, what the Chinese government said it wanted to have happen in this sector has pretty much happened. So it's
Earlier than they
earlier
originally
than they
anticipated.
expected. So I mean, it's fun in the West to make fun of 5 year plans. Communist government 5 year plans. I'm not sure we should be making fun of this one. It seems like it's a pretty serious statement.
Well, the United States would do well to have a longer than a 4 year, 3 year plan for economic development and economic growth. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen with the politics that we have currently. But we see that it does make a huge impact, a positive impact on the economy, at least in China's case. Now, a couple other numbers that were pretty striking to me. 2028 is when they're forecasting that they're going to reach carbon emissions a peak. So
Hmm.
we've
Saw that.
heard all these rumors and all these reports about peak oil, and so that effectively gets to that point specifically 2028. So does the Middle East believe that to be the case? If that's so, how much does that cut off of their forecasts? When do they see peak oil? Because 2028 is right around the corner.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
obviously,
tomorrow. I mean, if you're planning investments for sure, absolutely. That's
yeah. And then, they also talked about connected vehicles being pretty ubiquitous and standard on
Mhm.
most vehicles in China. And
Mhm.
connected and intelligent, meaning level 3, level 4, would be, by 2040 on most vehicles. And so this dovetails over, and we can talk about this, but really quickly moving back over to the GM Tech Day, the
Right.
first level 3 vehicle that GM is going to launch is the Escalade IQ. So I know you spent a few minutes browsing GM's Tech Day. So good, bad, the ugly. Joe, why don't you let us know what you think?
Yeah, I did not. First of all, I did not go to the tech day. I did not go. But I listened to or read the transcripts of interviews that Mary Barra and Sterling Anderson, who I'll come back to in a second, the new chief of product strategy for GM, gave to the Decoder podcast, Neelay Patel's podcast, quite extensive interview. And also an interview that Sterling Anderson gave to Automotive's Shift podcast, which also an extensive interview. And I'll hit what I thought were the highlights. I mean, what was interesting. So first of all, it's important for anyone, two people who don't know this maybe, is that Sterling Anderson um, has been a leader in sort of autonomous vehicle and autonomous vehicle technology for a long, long time. He's one of the originals, OGs in that space. He worked at Tesla. Then he went to Aurora, the autonomous or self-driving truck company. GM hired him away from Aurora, but he brings to GM, obviously the experience that he had at Tesla and the mindset, the kind of the Silicon Valley digital tech industry mindset that is prevalent at both of those companies. So
And the
now,
credibility for Wall
and the
Street.
credibility, right, and credibility with Wall Street. I mean, it look, as far as I can tell, it's a great hire by GM, and so that he was hired, I think, back in May. Started in June. I just looked this up because I'm riding my high speed rodeo. I was doing it before we jumped on. So he's been with GM a little less than 5 months, and this is his big rollout. Um, Look, I mean, if you look at what GM is talking about, we're going to have eyes off the road, automated driving. We're going to have backup power as a business. We're going to have a unified electrical architecture for future vehicles that will allow for rapid and frequent updating of the vehicle. We're going to have, oh, we're going to invest in robots. I mean, what does this sound familiar? Well, yes, of course it sounds familiar because a lot of that stuff is adapted from the Tesla playbook. I mean, it's the idea that it's not a car company; it's a digital technology company that happens to make cars. Um, Now, look, I don't have a problem with Sterling Anderson. I mean, that's why they hired Sterling Anderson. They didn't hire Sterling Anderson to come to GM and do the same old stuff. They hired this guy to bring that sensibility and this menu of product strategies and tech strategies to the company. Um, I guess the proof will
Could
be in
we
the
say
pudding.
that he's GM's Doug Field?
He's GM's Doug Field. And Doug Field, again, to place everyone, Doug Field was hired by Ford, I think, back in 2021. He is former Tesla. He led development of the Model 3, which is basically the Model 3 and the Y. He then went to Apple to lead what, at least for the time being, is an abortive attempt to build an Apple car. But again, this is, and I think he started his career at Ford. So this is one of those, he and Sterling Anderson are two relatively rare executives, leaders who have worked both in the digital technology world at a high level, but also in the world of machines that move at a high level. So if you're trying to adapt the Tesla playbook and you're years behind, I mean, I'll be uncharitable now. I mean, Tesla, debuted the Model S with upgradable software and a unified electrical architecture. I get this mixed up. I think it's the zonal architecture, the big brain in the car. That's over a decade ago now. And if you say, well, okay, fine, forget the Model S, the Model 3 should have been the wake up call. Well, sure thing. And that was what, 6 or 7 years ago now. Um, GM's new EV, all singing, all dancing, big brain electrical architecture isn't coming until 2020, roughly 2028. And then they're going to roll it out over time because they're not going to rip up all their vehicles at once. That's billions and billions of dollars. So anyway, so it's interesting to see these companies sort of, this is like version 2.0 of their attempts to kind of
Yeah,
replicate the
I was
Tesla
gonna
formula,
say,
if
Joe, this
not
is their
3.0.
mulligan.
This is a mulligan because to be uncharitable to a vehicle I actually kind of like. The Mustang Mach-E was version 1.0, which is okay. These guys are selling this compact SUV out the yin yang. What are we going to do, guys? Oh, we'll jack an electric vehicle powertrain into a compact SUV, give it some style, call it a Mustang, and off you go. I mean, GM might have had a more complex and deliberate strategy, but it was not the full kind of Tesla approach. It now seems like, okay, this time 2.0, we're going to go we're going to go all the way. Last point. Interesting that they're doing this even as Tesla and Elon Musk are basically saying EVs, who cares? We're going to barely invest in updating the product. We're talking about humanoid robots and AI and power generation. That's it just seems like Tesla, having kind of set the template for what a modern 21st century car company needs to be and to what kind of products it needs to have, has said, "Oh, just kidding. We're going off in this other direction." Uh, but GM and Ford and a lot of the other legacy automakers are still chasing, Tesla 1.0. It's kind of head spinning, but that's what I made of it.
Well, and then Elon. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to do this unless you approve my $1 trillion pay package.
Yeah, no, that's extraordinary. And we're jumping off GM, but just since you raised it, just I think yesterday, or the day before, Robin Denholm, who's the chairman or chairwoman, pardon me, the chair of Tesla's board, um, sent a message to investors and shareholders basically saying, if you don't pass this $1 trillion package, which will give Elon Musk upwards of 25% control of the company, which is basically what he's demanded, um, he may leave, which is, a way of saying, do what I say or we'll shoot the dog.
Yeah, he's
Um,
holding Tesla hostage and shareholders
yeah,
hostage.
yeah, it seems like it. So, and he went off the reservation on during his Q3 call, calling these two proxy advisory firms that said don't support this, called them quote corporate terrorists unquote, which is not the kind of talk you hear from CEOs in reference to these companies, these institutions, which do hold a lot of power, whether they like it or not. That to it because they advise these big passive investment funds on how to vote on proxy issues. And Elon Musk is basically giving them the middle, well, worse than the middle finger. He's calling them terrorists. So yeah, there's a lot of churn there. There's a lot of
So
churn
here's
there.
here's a couple of comments. He's calling them terrorists, and then it's getting amplified on his social media platform. Number one.
Absolutely.
Number two, it's a bit rich, literally and figuratively, that the richest person in the world is whining about how unfair life is.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's a tough look. I think for most
and
people.
so here's my take on the Tesla thing. We'll jump back to GM in a second, but the Tesla thing is, if he didn't have this track record of abandoning what got Tesla to where it is, and that's through automotive manufacturing, pushing FSD through the vehicles, and now basically saying we're a robotaxi and robotics company, okay? Because he knows that vehicle sales or passenger vehicle sales will flatten out and will shrink unless he can come up with another hit. And I don't know, Joe, if any volume uh, passenger vehicles that they try to push out in the next few years, they're not going to be winners like the 3 and the Y, because BYD will already have been in Europe.
Yeah.
BYD is in China. So anything that's less than 20,000 US dollars is going to have 2 or 3 competitors anywhere it goes outside of the US with the
Well,
current
absolutely.
trajectory that we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have been one, and I know I'm not the only one to compare Elon Musk to Henry Ford, the original Henry Ford, and the Model T. And you know what? The original Henry Ford and the people who worked with him were geniuses, and they came up with a vehicle that was like no other at that time, right? The Model T. And they ran that sucker for, I forget exactly how many years, but into the early 1920s. But what do you know? Other companies, General Motors, other companies as well, came along, and they not only replicated, they caught up with the Model T, they replicated the Model T, but then they did better than the Model T. I mean, General Motors created a whole status ladder. They had the insight of that automobile user status. Cut to history lesson. Ford is not the number one automaker in the world anymore by volume or profits. They lost that, and they lost it a long time ago. You know, Elon Musk is in the same boat as Henry Ford. He was a master innovator. The people he drove the people around him to do something that had never been done before. But guess what? As you've said, there's lots and lots of companies now that are putting out credible EVs, arguably better in certain ways than what Tesla is offering. Even GM has EVs that can for a lot of people are a good alternative to Tesla, even though they don't quite replicate all of the functionality. You're right. He does not. I mean, I remember he used to be talking about we'll be selling 10 million Teslas or 20 million Teslas. That's not going to happen. It's just not. And that's where he's
Well,
at. He's what
now
he has.
now contractually, if he's going to get that pay package approved, it's 20 million cumulative, not a year. It's
Yeah.
cumulative.
Well, right. And I think and I guess the question is, yeah. And again, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but the question is, what do you count? Do you count the robots, the Optimuses as a volume as toward that volume goal? I mean, but right. I mean, it's and again, I've seen from listening to the call and then again reporting, I've seen this in this past week. It is not apparent at all that they have an answer to the question, what are you going to sell that's new besides the Model 3 and the Model Y? I mean, the Model S is disappearing. It's like the Cheshire Cat. That's all that's left is the smile. Um, and apparently, he refused to answer a question about that. Talked all kinds of future this and future that, but no, he would absolutely not, did not refuse to address cars, future vehicles, SUVs, whatever. So yeah, I think they're going off in a new direction.
The one thing is, a couple of things. They pretty much know, the board knows that if Elon leaves, the share price will crater.
Yes,
But
that's a pretty good prediction.
they don't know is, because if you look at the targets, they're really really aggressive outside of the 20 million cumulative.
Hmm.
Now, if he's to turn them into a multi-trillion-dollar company, you would argue that, yeah, maybe he deserves it, but at 25%, he might take Tesla in a completely different direction.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely. Yeah,
so,
absolutely. He could do that. Yeah. And
and
I think that's the point. I mean, you know, he's one of those people, and there's some other people in public life who are like this. If you listen to what he says, he actually kind of says what he means. And he says, I'm going to build this robot army, and I don't want, someone to just oust me, if that happens. There's my cat. I don't want that. Well, I think he meant exactly what he said. He wants to be able to pocket the winnings if he's actually able to develop, a quote unquote robot army that can, hoover up, what are now wages paid to humans and turn it into revenue paid to a robot service. I mean, that's what I
well,
think, and I
also,
think there's some others who think
here's the
that too.
thing: there's SpaceX, there's the Boring Company, there's all these different, and then
Yeah,
you
let's
look
not
at it
forget
like,
those things.
if if Tesla is struggling, maybe he's going to use Tesla IP to help SpaceX and vice versa, and not need to pay because he's in complete control of all these companies. And so it gets potentially really messy
Yeah,
because,
from a corporate governance point of view, it's very messy. I agree, and that's definitely one of the challenges. Is that if and again, corporate governance hasn't been a huge concern, apparently, at Tesla over the years, but there are rules, and they have to figure out how to manage that risk.
well, I think corporate governance in the last couple of years, especially with perhaps the current administration, seems to be being pushed on the back burner a
Yeah,
little bit,
yeah, it's
Joe.
it's it's a second order problem.
So, I
Um,
mean,
yeah,
we're becoming a socialist society by acquiring 10-15% stakes in companies anyways, right? Or
yeah,
demanding that they share their revenue with us. So,
right, right, yeah,
um,
yeah. Interesting
but
world.
let me circle back to the GM and
Yeah.
uh, kind of talk about my take, because I think you had made some great points, but I also want to point out that there was a new Bolt, probably a alpha or beta or pilot, parked on the road in Manhattan, downtown
Hmm.
Manhattan, that people got to check out. It looked pretty production ready, so I don't have any doubt that they could launch that by end of Q1
Right.
2026 with a $29,000 price point. But they also talked about the LMR battery, which they're leaning really
Hmm.
heavily into. Kurt is
Yeah, I
posting a
should have
lot in
mentioned that.
LinkedIn
That's a good
about it.
point. Hmm.
And, as they're having this tech day, as they crushed it the day before, with the share price increasing by 15%, they're writing a $1.6 billion check to write off production and some of the contracts for the EV
Yeah,
forward.
and they're cutting the workforce again. They cut another I think 200 jobs out of their salaried engineering workforce. So yeah, it's two things at once.
As a capitalist, I don't mind that. They're reconciling their future need. Now, as someone who lives in Michigan, I feel for the people that are going to be caught in the crossfire a little bit. But I'm teaching my kids that they always have to keep their skills up. They always have to work hard. And so, unfortunately, hopefully, these people are able to land on their feet and everything. But that's what differentiates us, I think, American companies with European companies, because the contracts are so strict that
Yeah,
it
yeah. There's no
makes
flexibility.
European companies pretty uncompetitive when it comes to trying to take on risk in order to redefine themselves for the future. But I almost want to say that they're talking out of both sides of their mouth a little bit. Sterling
Well,
Anderson
yeah.
also wrote an op-ed that
Mhm.
kind of articulated how they were looking at safety, how they're looking at
Mhm.
it'll anticipate your needs. And so we're now moving from product to user focus, right? Because now they're talking about your needs, and now they're not talking about the features of the vehicle, which is very, very technology focused, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's an important point. That's an important point. Yeah, and I do think that look, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, I listened to Sterling Anderson talk about the level. He doesn't like to call it level three, and by the way, I agree with him. But the eyes off driving system that they want to create or
Hands off, eyes off.
launch for hands off, eyes off. Um, you know, and that sounds really great, and from a sort of like wow, a wow point of view and a why should I buy point of view. I over the last weekend I drove to the rural part of upstate New York, or through a lot of the rural upstate New York to the rural part of upstate New York that I grew up in. And I drove and I hung out with friends from my high school, and I drove back. And we were joking about how many times people who live in Sullivan County, New York, where I grew up, have hit a deer with their car, and there were like 5 or 6 times. It's just like a common occurrence. Oh yeah, you'll wing a deer with your car. And I was driving back on Interstate 86 across the southern part of Western New York. I was thinking two things. One, gosh, it would be great to have this eyes off system that Sterling's talking about on this podcast I'm listening to, trying not to fall asleep. Um, Two, I wonder what that system would do if a 4 point buck jumped out in front of my Jeep. And that's the problem. I mean, even an empty it wasn't really empty, but a kind of a rural highway in the middle of nowhere, you can have an unpredictable event. And how does that get handled? When I hit the deer with my automated Escalade, whose fault is that? Who pays for the fender? And I think those problems are going to be hard to sort out. And again, I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing, very loosely paraphrasing what Anderson had to say about this is one, he said, look, we'll be able to figure out whether the machine or the person was at fault because of the data we get. Two, if we GM are at fault, we will stand behind the product. And three, I think maybe he would have put this first. We're going to design the product so that it's safe. And I still say, what about the deer? The deer is going to confound all this, not just the deer, all kinds of things. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but I think it's going to be harder to do in this country than maybe they'd like.
And GM's comms teams have trained Sterling Anderson quite well in a short period of time, but also I don't think he's going to be at GM in 15 years when he's saying GM's going to stand behind uh, if they
Yeah,
if
well,
they
yeah,
are
we'll
at
see.
fault.
Yeah, well, right, or frankly, anyone in current management. But look, there's a lot. I think there's a reason why they're not promising anything before 2028, and then even then, in a very limited run, super expensive vehicle, which is the electric Escalade. They will not be doing what Tesla is doing, which is beta testing their driving systems on
Or
thousands and thousands of customers.
forcing us to be beta testers.
Yeah, right. Forcing
You know,
forcing everybody else on the road to be beta testing. I don't think they're not going to do that. There was like a one very brief moment in one of the interviews. I think it might have been the Decoder interview, um, where Sterling Anderson says something to the effect of, "Well, we're not autopilot, or autopilot isn't testing the way we do." And I think, yeah, you would know because that's what he ran.
a, a couple of points right before we pivot to the last topic, which is the Reuters conference.
Mhm.
But one media person that was there in New York had asked him, Sterling, I think, what about the data? And who owns the data? And he said the customer owns it. And so he was a bit non-committal. Does that mean that GM's going to compensate us for using our data? And so
Well,
the data part is really still an open question about
uh,
who owns
yeah,
it, who gets to see it, who gets to share it. And
Who
so
gets to
that is
monetize it and
another,
how? Yeah.
that's exactly another layer that you and I should pursue over the next 18 to 24 months to see if people are able to articulate, especially the ones that are going to take advantage of it and try to monetize it, obviously.
Yeah.
But really quickly, Joe, I know you are moderating a few different panels Wednesday and Thursday. So maybe you can kind of summarize what your experience has been over the last few years, not just this year, but what's the Reuters conference about? What do you get out of it, and what are you moderating this time around?
Yeah, and I'll try to do it briefly. Look, I mean, this the Reuters Automotive Conference. They do one in Europe, and they do this one in Detroit, and it's a good show. I mean, they get senior executives from a number of car companies to show up. Reuters journalists. I'm retired from Reuters now, but Reuters journalists will interview them, get them to make news, which they usually are successful at doing. Usually, these folks come with a purpose. And of course, you get to hang out with people, not just, sort of senior automaker executives, but people who are kind of down in the trenches doing real work at supplier companies, especially companies that supply digital technology and kind of advanced technology to the auto industry.
Those are
These are the
generally the
folks who,
more interesting conversations, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah, very much so, because they see how the sausage is really getting made, and how much of the snouts and the whats are going into it. So from that perspective, it's fun for me as a journalist, covering the industry, to kind of get reality checks and to learn things. You always learn something from being with people that you don't learn from watching a video, or even or whatever other sort of indirect means. If you're with people, you're just going to learn more. You're going to learn what the reality is behind some of the bold claims. The panels I'm moderating. See if I can remember them. The panels I'm moderating, one has to do with the state of the supply chains, which is a very timely topic. Again, we've got chip concerns. Again, we've got rare earth concerns because of the trade war. Again, and then the trade wars have kind of replaced, COVID disruption as a source of instability in supply chains. So there's that. We'll be talking actually about the topic you mentioned just a minute ago. Who owns the data, digital monetization strategies, with several people from different companies, including Volkswagen. And then the final panel is one that's also about sort of the effect of digital technology and AI and software but more on an organizational level. I mean, you look, again, you're seeing these companies, you're starting to see, I think, the leaves dropping out of the sky as these companies start to say, you know what, why do we have, all these people doing, clerical functions or doing kind of rote CAD CAM, checks and whatnot, when we could just hand that over to AI or hand that over to a more sophisticated digital systems. So again, one of my panels is that, and then you and I are going to have a talk about kind of the U.S. versus China. Is who can win? Can there be a tie? And I'm looking forward to that. Again, timely because of this latest statement from the Chinese government about their ambitions.
Also, I do want to point to your point about AI, because GM is closing its technical center in Georgia, and likely going to replace a lot of those employees with AI. And so I
Yeah,
think what we're starting to see more and more is bricks and mortar Fortune 500 companies anticipate what AI is going to be able to do for them and try to right size their companies. So these are real issues across multiple sectors,
yeah,
not just the automotive space. So
yeah, yeah.
timely conversations, I think. So I'm looking forward to it. And
Me
hopefully
too.
our conversation, at least, Joe, is that we've gotten past whether China is a factor, a danger, a competitor. And now I want to focus on, what are you guys doing internally? What questions do you still have? And are you moving faster? Because what I get out of it is this interaction and the questions, because the questions will tell me what people are kind of thinking about or what concerns that
Yeah,
they have. Because when there's traditional panels, a lot of the senior execs are trained by the comms people to talk for 45 minutes but say absolutely nothing. And
Yeah,
so
or say one thing and then that's it.
and repeat it and
I always
repeat
felt
it
good.
and
Yeah,
repeat
I
it.
always felt good if I could get one thing, that one little nugget. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Cause I remember a panel last year I was on in some conference and the moderator asked three questions, like completely different questions to one person. And they kept on going back to their charging infrastructure every single time. Well, our charging infrastructure.
Right.
And it was
Right.
like, whoa. So these people are trained pretty well. And I like
Yeah.
more the rank and file are a bit more off the cuff, and I think they'll openly communicate concerns and opportunities that they see because their boss is not sitting right behind them. So again, I'm looking forward to it as well. So Joe, I think that's all I really
I think
wanted
we've
to
done
talk about. Unless there's any
I think we've covered a lot
anything
of ground.
last.
No, no, I think we covered a lot of ground. Let's leave them wanting a little bit more, and we'll see you soon, everybody. Again, yeah, and don't forget, like and subscribe, folks. Like and subscribe. All right, two. Have a great
We will
rest of your
talk with
week.
you
See you
all very
downtown.
soon. Joe, we'll see you tomorrow.
Likewise. All right, bye bye.